Before we start, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person? Maybe they thought someone was weak, but that person turned out to be much stronger than expected? Tell me in the comments. And if you like stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss one. Now, let me tell you a story. It was a quiet evening in a small town. The sun was setting, painting the sky with orange and pink colors. The air was cool, and the streets were peaceful. Shops were closing, and only a few people were walking around. Emily Carter stepped out of her small apartment. She wore a light blue jacket and jeans. Her dark brown hair was tied back in a ponytail. She looked like an ordinary woman, but there was something different about her. Emily was blind. She could not see the beautiful sky or the street lights turning on. She could not see the people passing by. But that did not stop her from living her life. She walked with confidence, holding the handle of her guide dog's harness. Her dog, Shadow, was a large black German shepherd. His fur was thick and shiny. His ears stood tall, always listening. His eyes were sharp, always watching. He walked beside Emily, guiding her safely. To most people, Emily looked fragile. They saw a blind woman and thought she needed help. Some thought she was weak. Some even thought she was helpless. But they had no idea who they were messing with. Because Shadow was not just a regular guide dog. Shadow was a retired Navy SEAL K9. He had been trained in the military. He had been on dangerous missions. He had saved lives. He knew how to fight. He knew how to protect. And tonight, he would prove that he was not just a pet, he was a warrior. Emily walks through town. Emily walked down the sidewalk, tapping her white cane lightly against the ground. Even though she could not see, she knew the way by heart. Shadow led her carefully, making sure she avoided any obstacles. She could hear the sounds around her, the distant honking of cars, the laughter of children playing, the soft chatter of people sitting outside a cafe. She smiled. She loved the sounds of the evening. She was heading to her favorite coffee shop. She always came here around this time to get a hot cup of tea and sit by the window. Even though she could not see the view, she liked feeling the warmth of the cup in her hands and listening to the world around her. Shadow walked beside her, his tail wagging slightly. But his ears twitched as he listened carefully. He was always alert. Always ready. A group of bikers appear. As Emily and Shadow walked down the street, a group of bikers pulled up near the sidewalk. There were 5 of them. Their motorcycles were loud, their engines roaring as they parked. The men wore black leather jackets. Their arms were covered in tattoos. Some had long beards, and some had dark sunglasses. They looked tough and mean. One of them, a tall man with a scar on his cheek, noticed Emily. "Hey, look at that," he said, nudging his friend. "A blind girl walking all alone." His friends turned to look. Another biker, a man with a shaved head, smirked. "She must be real brave. Walking around without anyone to help her." The others laughed. Shadow's ears stood up. He could hear the laughter. He could sense something was wrong. His muscles tensed. His sharp eyes watched the men closely. But Emily. She kept walking. She was used to people whispering about her. She was used to people underestimating her. She didn't care. But these men? They were not just whispering. They were about to cause trouble. The bikers moved closer. The tall biker with the scar grinned. "Hey, lady. Need some help crossing the street?" Emily didn't answer. She just kept walking. Shadow growled softly. It was a warning. The biker with the shaved head stepped forward, blocking Emily's path. "What's the matter? Too good to talk to us?" Emily stopped. She gripped Shadow's harness a little tighter. She could feel the men around her. She could hear their footsteps. She knew they were trying to intimidate her. The third biker, a man with a gold tooth, chuckled. She can't even see us, man. What's she gonna do? Walk away. The others laughed again. Shadow stiffened. His growl got louder. His body was ready to move. Emily took a deep breath. She was not afraid. But the bikers had no idea what was coming. Shadow's first warning. The biker with the scar reached out as if to touch Emily's shoulder. That was a big mistake. Before his hand could even come close, Shadow lunged forward just a little. He didn't bite. He didn't attack. But his deep, powerful growl made the biker freeze. It was the kind of growl that sent chills down a person's spine. It was not the growl of a pet. It was the growl of a trained warrior. The biker snatched his hand back. Whoa! What's with the dog? Emily tilted her head slightly. Shadow doesn't like bullies. The shaved-headed biker frowned. Relax, lady. We're just having fun. But Shadow's growl didn't stop. His ears were pinned back. His teeth were bare. He was telling them, back off now. The bikers shifted uncomfortably. Across the street, an older man was watching. He had been in the military for years, and he knew the stance of a trained dog when he saw one. That's no ordinary dog, he murmured. He walked closer and called out, hey. You boys better walk away. That's a Navy SEAL dog. The bikers froze. What? The man with the gold tooth asked. The older man nodded. That dog has been on battlefields. He's trained to take down enemies. You mess with her? You mess with him. The bikers looked at each other. Shadow stood his ground, his eyes locked on them. The tall biker swallowed hard. Man, one of them mumbled. Let's go. The others hesitated, but then they backed away. The tall biker pointed at Shadow. You're lucky we're in a good mood. Emily just smiled. No. You're lucky Shadow is. The bikers got on their motorcycles and sped away. Shadow watched them until they disappeared. Then, and only then, he relaxed. Emily kneeled down and patted his head. Good boy, she whispered. Shadow's tail wagged. Because tonight, he had done his job. And no one, not even a group of tough bikers, was going to hurt his human. The sun had gone down, and the town was getting quiet. The street lights flickered on, casting a soft yellow glow on the sidewalks. Most of the stores had closed, and only a few people were still outside. Some were walking home, some were sitting on benches, and some were finishing their coffee at the small cafe on the corner. Emily Carter walked carefully down the sidewalk, her hand resting gently on Shadow's harness. The cool night air brushed against her face. She could hear the soft buzzing of a street lamp, the distant hum of a car's engine, and the faint laughter of a group of teenagers a few streets away. She couldn't see the world around her, but she knew it. She had walked this path many times before. Shadow walked beside her, strong and steady. His black fur gleamed under the streetlights. His ears twitched as he listened to every sound. His sharp eyes scanned everything ahead. To Emily, it was just another night. A normal walk to the cafe. But Shadow? He sensed something different. The bikers noticed Emily. A few steps ahead, parked outside a gas station, was a group of bikers. There were 5 of them. Their motorcycles were lined up in a row, shiny and loud-looking. The men stood around, talking and laughing. Their voices were deep and rough. They wore black leather jackets with patches on them. Some had long beards, and others had shaved heads. Their arms were covered in tattoos, skulls, snakes, fire. They looked tough. They looked like the kind of men who didn't like to be messed with. One of them, Jake, was the biggest of them all. He had a scar on his cheek and cold blue eyes. He was leaning against his motorcycle, smoking a cigarette. Jake noticed Emily first. He tilted his head, watching as she walked past. He saw the white cane in her hand. He saw the way she let her dog guide her. He smirked. "Hey, look at this," Jake muttered, elbowing his friend. A blind girl walking all alone. His friend, a man with a gold tooth, chuckled. "She must be real brave." Another biker, a man with a shaved head, grinned. "Or real stupid." The group laughed. Shadow's ears perked up. His muscles stiffened. He didn't like the sound of those voices. Emily heard them, too. But she kept walking. She had learned a long time ago that it was better to ignore people like that. But Jake wasn't done. Jake steps closer. Jake took a step forward, blocking Emily's path. Shadow stopped immediately. His body went still. His head lowered slightly. His sharp eyes locked on Jake. Emily also stopped. She could feel someone standing in front of her. The air felt different, heavier. She didn't need to see to know that this man was trouble. Jake smirked and put his hands on his hips. "What's a little lady like you doing out so late?" he asked. His voice was fake friendly, but there was something mean underneath it. Emily gripped Shadow's harness a little tighter. "I'm just going to get some tea," she said calmly. Jake raised an eyebrow. "All by yourself?" He looked at his friends. "That doesn't seem safe, does it?" The gold-toothed biker shook his head. "Not safe at all." The shaved-headed man grinned. "She should have someone looking after her." They all laughed. Shadow's first warning. Shadow growled softly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a full snarl. But it was enough. The kind of growl that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Jake stopped laughing. He looked down at Shadow, raising an eyebrow. "Whoa, easy there, boy," he said, taking a small step back. But Shadow didn't move. His deep brown eyes stayed locked on Jake. His tail was still. His ears were pinned back. His body was tense, ready to move in an instant. Emily reached down, gently patting Shadow's head. She didn't say anything, but she knew exactly what Shadow was doing. Jake's friends shifted uncomfortably. "That's not a normal guide dog," the gold-toothed man muttered. Jake frowned. He didn't like feeling nervous around a dog. He was the tough one. He was the one who made people afraid. Jake tries again. Jake forced a smile and took another step forward. "Hey, relax," he said. "We're just being friendly." Shadow's growl got louder. Jake's smile faded. The shaved-headed biker nudged him. "Dude, maybe we should leave her alone." Jake glared at him. He didn't like backing down. But something about the way Shadow stood so still, so ready, made him uneasy. Jake looked at Emily again. "You sure you don't need any help?" His voice was less confident now. Emily smiled slightly. "I'm sure." Jake clenched his jaw. He didn't like feeling powerless. He didn't like being ignored. But then something unexpected happened. An old man speaks up. Across the street, sitting on a bench, was an older man. He had gray hair, a worn-out army jacket, and sharp eyes that had seen many things. He had been watching. And he recognized something the bikers didn't. "That's not just a guide dog," the old man called out. Jake and his friends turned to look at him. The old man stood up slowly. "That dog isn't just leading her around," he said. "He's protecting her." Jake squinted. "What are you talking about, old man?" The older man took a step closer. "That dog is a war dog. A retired Navy SEAL K9. The group of bikers froze. Jake's eyes flickered back to Shadow. The silent, unmoving, deadly Shadow. Jake swallowed hard. You're joking. The old man shook his head. I know that stance. I know that growl. That dog has been trained to take down threats in seconds. He looked Jake in the eyes. And right now, he sees you as a threat. Jake took a slow step back. Shadow didn't move. The silence felt heavy. The gold-toothed biker whispered, "Dude, let's go." The shaved-headed man nodded quickly. "Yeah. Not worth it?" Jake hesitated. His face burned with embarrassment. He didn't like backing down. But he also didn't want to find out if the old man was telling the truth. He forced a smirk. "Fine. Whatever." He lifted his hands in surrender. Didn't want to help her anyway. He turned on his heel and walked away. His friends quickly followed. Emily and Shadow continue on. Emily waited until she couldn't hear the biker's footsteps anymore. Then she sighed and scratched behind Shadow's ear. "Good boy," she whispered. Shadow relaxed, his tail wagging slightly. The old man smiled. "That's one heck of a dog you've got there, miss." Emily smiled. "Yeah," she said. "I know." Then she and Shadow kept walking. Because their night wasn't ruined. Because they were never afraid. And because Shadow always protected her no matter what. The night air felt heavier now. The street was quiet except for the low rumble of the bikers' voices and the faint hum of a car passing by in the distance. The dim street lights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. Emily stood still, her grip firm on Shadow's harness. She could feel the tension in the air. She didn't need to see their faces to know what was happening. The way their boots shuffled closer, the way their voices changed, it was enough. And Shadow? He knew it too. His body was stiff, his ears pinned back. His sharp eyes flicked from one man to the next, his muscles tight, ready. Then one of them reached out. A rough, calloused hand moved toward Emily's arm. That was his first mistake. Shadow strikes. Before the man's fingers could touch her, Shadow moved fast, like a shadow in the dark. His deep, low growl cut through the silence. It wasn't just any growl. It was a warning. The kind of sound that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Jake, the leader of the bikers, felt it first. A strange, cold shiver ran down his spine. He forced a nervous laugh. "Whoa, easy there, pup." But Shadow wasn't just any pup. Emily stayed calm, her fingers lightly resting on Shadow's harness. She didn't need to hold him back. He knew exactly what to do. A different kind of dog. The other bikers watched Shadow now, their smirks fading. They had seen big dogs before. They had heard growls before. But this was different. There was something in Shadow's stance, something controlled, something lethal. One of the bikers, the one with the gold tooth, whispered, "Man, that's not a normal dog." The bald biker nodded slowly. "Yeah. I don't like this." "But Jake?" Jake didn't want to look weak. He forced a grin and took a step forward. "Relax," he said, waving his hand like it was no big deal. "We're just saying hi. No need to get all worked up." Shadow didn't move. His deep brown eyes locked onto Jake. His tail stayed still. His body was ready, waiting. And then Jake made his second mistake. Pushing too far. Jake crouched down slightly, like he was trying to show he wasn't a threat. But then, he reached toward Shadow. The moment his fingers came too close, Shadow struck. He didn't bite. Not yet. Instead, he lunged forward just enough to snap his powerful jaws an inch from Jake's hand. His teeth clacked together, the sound sharp like a gunshot in the quiet street. Jake jumped back so fast he nearly tripped over his own boots. His face went pale. His hands trembled for a second before he shoved them in his pockets to hide it. His friends stared, eyes wide. Shadow stood tall again, calm, steady like nothing had happened. But everyone knew. If Shadow wanted to bite, Jake's hand would be gone. The bikers hesitate. The gold-toothed biker swallowed hard. Dude. I don't think this is a good idea. The bald one nodded quickly. Let's just go. She's not worth it. Jake's ego burned. He hated looking scared. He glared at Emily, then at Shadow. It's just a stupid dog, he muttered. That was his third mistake. The old man's warning. A voice called out from across the street. Son, that's no ordinary dog. It was the old man again, the one with the gray hair and worn-out army jacket. He had been watching everything. Jake and his gang turned toward him. What's it to you, old man? Jake snapped. The old man walked closer, his boots clicking against the pavement. He stopped just a few feet away, his sharp eyes locked onto Shadow. I've seen dogs like him before, the old man said. His voice was calm, steady. And I know exactly what he is. Jake crossed his arms. Oh yeah? And what's that? The old man's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. That dog, he said, pointing at Shadow, is a retired Navy SEAL K9. The bikers froze. Even Jake. The truth about Shadow. The old man took another step closer. His eyes stayed on Shadow, and for a moment, just a moment, there was respect in them. That dog, the old man continued, was trained for combat. He was trained to take down enemies. He was trained to protect his handler at all costs. The bikers looked at Shadow again. Now, he didn't just look like a big black dog. He looked like a soldier. Jake licked his lips. You're messing with me. The old man shook his head. I've seen K9s like him overseas, he said. They're faster than you think. Stronger than you think. And if you push them too far. He let out a short laugh. You won't even see it coming. Jake stiffened. His fingers twitched like he wanted to reach for something, maybe a weapon, maybe his pride. But then Shadow did something unexpected. The final warning. Shadow took a single step forward. Just one step. But it was enough. Jake and his men flinched. Shadow's eyes never left Jake's. His ears stayed pinned back, his body still not stiff, not scared. Just waiting. Jake's chest tightened. Something about that dog, something about the way he moved, it made every instinct scream at him to walk away. The gold-toothed biker took a step back. Come on, man, he muttered. Let's go. The bald biker was already turning away. Jake's jaw clenched. He wanted to fight. He wanted to prove he wasn't scared. But deep down, he knew. He couldn't win. The bikers retreat. Jake spat on the ground. Whatever, he muttered. Not worth it? He turned on his heel and stormed off. His friends quickly followed, their boots clanking against the pavement. None of them looked back. None of them wanted to. And Shadow? He simply watched them go. Emily's smile. Emily exhaled softly, running her fingers through Shadow's fur. Good boy, she whispered. Shadow's ears perked up. His tail wagged just a little. The old man chuckled. That's one hell of a protector you got there, miss. Emily smiled. Yeah, she said. I know. And just like that, she turned, walking toward the cafe. Like nothing had ever happened. Because for her and Shadow, it was just another night. The street was quiet now, too quiet. The air felt thick, heavy. A few minutes ago, the bikers had been laughing, loud and full of confidence. But now, they weren't so sure. Emily stood still, one hand on Shadow's harness. She wasn't scared. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't even nervous. And Shadow? His deep, rumbling growl filled the air like thunder before a storm. His ears were pinned back. His body was tight, ready to strike. Then, Emily spoke. "Step back." Her voice was calm, but there was something in it, something that made the bikers hesitate. For the first time that night, Jake didn't move forward. Then, a voice came from across the street. "I'd listen to her." All heads turned. A man stood near a parked truck. His arms were crossed, his eyes locked on Shadow. He looked older, maybe in his late 50s, with a face that had seen things most people never would. His jacket was worn and faded, but if you looked closely, you could see it a military patch on the sleeve. Jake sneered. "Yeah? And why's that?" The man took a slow step forward. His boots clicked against the pavement. "Because that's not just a guide dog." The bikers frowned. Emily said nothing. She just let the words sink in. The man pointed at Shadow. His voice was steady. "Certain." The bikers looked at each other. A few of them shifted uncomfortably. They didn't like the way the old man was looking at Shadow, like he knew exactly what the dog could do. Jake forced a laugh. What?" The man didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just stared at Jake and said, "A Navy SEAL K9." Jake's grin faded. One of the other bikers, a guy with a tattoo covering his neck, swallowed hard. "No way," he muttered. "You mean, like, a real war dog?" Emily smiled faintly. It wasn't a cocky smile. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was a knowing smile. She reached down and ran her fingers through Shadow's thick fur. "Shadow spent years on the battlefield," she said. Her voice was still calm, still steady. "He's taken down enemies bigger and stronger than you. You take one more step, and he'll do what he was trained to do." The bikers went silent. Shadow's growl deepened. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't just a noise. It was a warning, a final chance. His muscles tensed. His eyes locked onto Jake. His tail didn't wag. His body didn't shake. He was waiting. Waiting for one more wrong move. The bald biker took a step back. Jake. Maybe we should just." But Jake wasn't ready to back down yet. His hands curled into fists. His pride was on the line. He hated looking weak. "I don't care what kind of dog it is," Jake spat. "It's just a stupid." The old man speaks again. "Boy." Jake stopped mid-sentence. The old man took another step forward. His eyes were sharp. Focused. "You ever seen a war dog in action?" he asked. Jake said nothing. The old man nodded toward Shadow. "I have. I've seen what they can do. Seen them take down men twice your size before they even know what hit 'em." Jake shifted his weight, suddenly unsure. "You think you're fast?" The old man continued. "That dog is faster. You think you're strong? That dog is stronger. And the difference between you and him." The street was dead silent. Even the wind had stopped. "The difference?" the old man repeated. "He doesn't fight for pride. He doesn't fight for ego. He fights to win." Jake's fingers twitched. "And Shadow?" "One step forward." Shadow took a single step forward. Just one. But that was enough. The bikers flinched. Jake's mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He felt it now. The same thing his friends felt. The same thing that made their stomachs twist. It wasn't just fear. It was certainty. The certainty that if they made the wrong move, even one wrong move, Shadow would end this fight before it even began. Jake wasn't stupid. He could see it. He could feel it. He forced himself to laugh. It was weak. "Whatever," he muttered, stepping back. "Not worth it." One by one, The other bikers followed. Backing away. Turning around. Leaving. None of them looked back. None of them wanted to. Emily stayed still until she could no longer hear the sound of their boots. Then, she sighed. "Good boy," she whispered. Shadow's ears perked up. His tail wagged just a little. The old man chuckled. "You got yourself one hell of a protector, miss." Emily smiled. "Yeah," she said softly. "I know." And then, just like that, she turned and kept walking. Like nothing had ever happened. Because for her and Shadow, this was just another night. The air was still. The only sound was the distant hum of streetlights and the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. The bikers, who had been so loud before, now stood silent. Their confidence gone. One of the bikers, a tall guy with a scar on his cheek, took a slow step back. His hands were shaking. He looked at Jake, then back at Shadow. Man, he muttered. "Let's go. It's not worth it." His voice wasn't cocky anymore. It wasn't teasing. It was nervous. He could feel it. They all could. This wasn't just a normal dog. Shadow wasn't barking, wasn't growling anymore. He was watching, waiting. His sharp eyes locked onto the gang like a hunter watching prey. He wasn't scared. They were. Jake clenched his fists, his pride burning inside him. He wanted to stay, to fight, to prove he was still in charge. But deep down, he knew. He had already lost. Shadow's final warning. Jake opened his mouth, ready to throw one last insult, but then it happened. Shadow moved. It wasn't a full attack. It wasn't even a bite. It was just one quick lunge forward, just a few inches, just enough to send a message. Jake stumbles. Jake's eyes widened. His whole body jerked back. His foot caught on the curb, and for a second, he lost his balance. He barely caught himself, stumbling, his heart pounding. The bikers watched in shock. Their fearless leader? The tough guy who always acted like nothing scared him. Backing away from a dog. Jake's face turned red with embarrassment. His hands shook as he pointed at Shadow. "Crazy dog," he muttered, trying to sound tough. But everyone could hear it. His voice was shaking. The other bikers didn't wait. They hurried to their motorcycles, their boots scuffing against the pavement. One of them fumbled with his keys, his hands unsteady. Engines roared to life, the deep rumble of motorcycles filling the night. But something was different now. They weren't revving to show off. They were rushing to get away. The bikers flee. Jake climbed onto his bike, his jaw tight. He didn't look at Emily. He didn't look at Shadow. He just sped off. The others followed, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they disappeared down the road. No more laughter. No more taunts. No more arrogance. Just defeat. Emily stood there, listening to the sound of them fading into the night. Then, she sighed. She reached down, her fingers brushing against Shadow's fur. "Good boy," she whispered. Shadow's ears perked up. His tail wagged just once, just a little. The old man, the one who had recognized Shadow, chuckled softly. "You handled that well," he said. Emily smiled. "We've handled worse." The old man nodded. "I believe it." He looked down at Shadow, admiration in his eyes. They had no idea who they were messing with. Emily gave a small laugh. "They do now." The old man smirked. "Bet they won't forget it anytime soon." The street was quiet again, peaceful. The danger was gone. Emily straightened her shoulders and gave Shadow one last pat. "C'mon, buddy. Let's go home." Shadow relaxed. His job was done. Together, they turned and walked away like nothing had ever happened. This was just another night. And justice? It had been served. The night was calm again. The wind blew softly, rustling the leaves on the trees. The street lights flickered, casting a warm glow on the pavement. Emily and Shadow walked away, side by side. To anyone watching, it looked like an ordinary woman with her guide dog. But those who had witnessed what just happened? More than meets the eye. People often think that strength is about size, muscles, or loud voices. They think the strongest person in the room is the one who talks the biggest, looks the toughest, or acts the meanest. But real strength? It doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes, strength is quiet. Sometimes, it's hidden. Sometimes, it's a woman who refuses to be afraid. And sometimes, it's a dog who never backs down. Judging by appearances, the bikers had laughed at Emily. They had seen her cane. They had seen her blindness. And in their minds, that meant she was weak. They had seen Shadow, too, but they only saw a dog. A guide dog. They had no idea that behind those calm eyes, behind that well-trained patience, there was a warrior. A dog trained to protect, to fight, to win. And by the time they figured it out, it was too late. Tonight, the bikers learned something important. They learned that fear doesn't make you strong. They learned that size doesn't make you powerful. And they learned that underestimating the wrong person or the wrong dog can be a big mistake. Because those who judge by appearances, they're the ones who never see it coming. A protector like no other. As Emily walked, she ran her fingers gently over Shadow's fur. He was calm now, his job done. He wasn't looking for trouble. He never did. But if trouble came again, he would be ready. And Emily knew, without a doubt, that Shadow would always be there for her. A protector. A friend. A warrior. If you had a dog like Shadow, would you feel safe? Would you trust him to protect you? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories just like this. Because sometimes, the best stories aren't just about heroes. They're about the ones who never let you down.